Hello, I am Emmanuelle Châteauneuf, and I am the creator of Queen Street and the Superman zine series, The Same Rainbow's End. And this is the True North Country Comics podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. On this episode, I chat with Emmanuelle Châteauneuf about her Superman zine, comic series, and more. Please like and subscribe to this website by hitting the subscribe button so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. Emmanuelle Châteauneuf is a Filipino-French Canadian graphic novelist and comics creator who grew up in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, and now resides in Hamilton, Ontario. In 2017, she produced her graphic novel Queen Street with Chapterhouse Publishing, and also contributed to Captain Canuck Season 3 that same year. In 2018, Emmanuelle provided artwork for Wayward Sisters, an Anthology of Monstrous Women. Her zine, The Same Rainbow's End, won the 2022 Best Fan Zine Award from Broken Pencil. She also participated in Frankenstein Visions from Slampress Tomes. Emmanuelle has had the honor of being featured in this year's TING Fest in London. Her most recent work includes Princess Bunyi and TSRE Origins. TSRE Origins offers Emmanuelle's take on the Lois and Superman myths. Available in zine formats, these works, described as DC Comics fan fiction, are written and illustrated by Emmanuelle. The series delves into the psyche of each character while showcasing how they perceive themselves in today's modern culture, as crafted by Emmanuelle, or offers her own unique take on the popular DC characters found in today's comic books. So, without further ado, here's my chat with Emmanuelle Châteauneuf about her Superman zine comic series and more. So, Emmanuelle Châteauneuf, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I appreciate your time. Before we get going with all the questions, though, I would like to know, what was the first comic book that you read?
Oh my goodness. That's a very interesting question because I grew up in a household that was just littered with comics. My father owned a comic book store before I was born. And so I'm pretty sure the first comics I probably got my hand on were like Asterix et Obelix or Tintin and like a random Nightwing or a Batman or something like that. But the first comic that truly captured my soul and my heart and that really made me look at comics in a different way was Rumiko Takahashi's Ranma One Half. Do you know that comic? Or
I've heard that mentioned. Unfortunately, I have not read it. What's it about?
they just revamped the entire anime and it's all on Netflix. So it's about gender fluidity, really. The comic was so ahead of its time. It's crazy. I think it came out around the tail end of the 80s and then into the 90s. It's about this 14-year-old boy named Ranma who is a martial artist. And him and his father, while training in China, fall into these magical springs. His father turns into a panda bear. And he now, when he is splashed with cold water, turns into a woman. So the thing is just his body that changes. His soul is still himself. He's still a 14-year-old boy, but he turns into a woman to his great dismay. And then his father ends up basically not selling him off, essentially, but his best friend growing up, his martial arts compatriot and like buddy, his friend owns like a dojo in Japan and has 3 daughters. And his father promised his friend, kind of like, oh, I'll let my son marry one of your 3 daughters someday so that, you'll have someone to inherit the dojo because, sexism. And because his 3 daughters can't do it. So it's this romance comedy. It's very subversive. It's hilarious. It's Rumiko Takahashi at the time. She was really poking fun satirically at the action kung fu genre at the time and making fun of all the sexism in it and all the different types of stereotypes, as well as making a lot of really hilarious and wonderful statements about trans identities and being gender fluid and queer relationships. It's so funny. It's so funny. And the storytelling is so profound. Some of the most beautiful comicking I've ever seen.
So great stuff growing up, but I'm wondering who or what inspires you to create today?
I wouldn't necessarily say there's a who. I mean, I definitely have many artists who I look to in terms of aspirational levels of storytelling and of inking and of illustration and artistry. But to be honest, the thing that inspires me to create most today is myself. My art, the way that I see it, is a way for me to challenge my life and to look at the challenges I'm facing and to unpack them and to try, if I can, to manifest, I don't know, better outcomes for myself, which is to say, it's like my art is my therapy. It comes from a place of survival and from a place, I think, I don't know, was it you that I talked about this in an interview with? I'm not sure, where I talked about how, like years ago when we first met, I talked about how my art comes from a place of me struggling to understand my emotions. And by comicking, I can. Was that you?
I can't recall that. My memory is really bad, but
Oh,
we did have a chat some
that
time ago. It's quite possible. Yeah.
would have been like 8 years ago now. My God. But yeah, no, my comics come from a place of me struggling to understand my feelings and emotions. And for me personally, I have to comic. I do this in therapy all the time with my therapist, and she always laughs. I have to tell a story. So I have to put my experience and my feelings and my emotions within the context of a fantasy or just some sort of adventure for me to be able to contextualize what I'm going through, which is, who knows, maybe that's TMI, but that's where it comes from. And so what inspires my comics these days is, yeah, just me wanting to understand myself more and my need to express my emotions and feel my emotions and understand my emotions and just try to learn and become a better person.
And comics are a great outlet for that too. So good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
We recently met up at the Hamilton Cartoon Foundry event. I want to get your thoughts on that. What was your experience overall?
Oh, it was so lovely. Was this your first year going to the
Yeah, it
event
was.
or?
Yeah, it was tremendous.
Oh, it
Ivan
was.
Kochmarek said I should drop by and met up with lots of folks, including yourself.
Oh, of course it was. Every year it is. Ivan is the sweetest. I ran into that community from my time at Chapterhouse many moons ago. Yeah, I love all of the artists who always show up. The Hamilton community is so loving and so kind and so down to earth. I always have a very good time. I always end up selling a lot, which is really nice. For anyone who tables, that's always a bonus. Yeah, it's lovely. It was so wonderful. It was great to catch up with everyone too and reconnect.
Absolutely. And one of the books that you had there was a Lois and Superman comic zine that you created. I wonder if you
Mm.
could talk a wee bit about that.
Yeah, my Superman zine series that surprised me and everyone, I think. So, what would you want to know about it?
Well, what inspired you to create it, first of all?
I believe it was either 2017 or 2018 that I began the production of my Lois Superman comic. And it was supposed to be just a free little calling card that I was making. It was right after the pandemic. It was a fall Comic Con or Fan Expo that was happening in October. In a week, I made a 10-page zine for Superman. And I was going to hand it out for free at the convention to see if it could get me work or anything like that, to be totally frank. So the comic did come from a place of spite. It did come from me wanting to kind of stick it to my colleagues and to show everyone that I could do something that nobody thought that I could do. Not in terms of timeline, just in terms of the subject matter, right? Because it's Superman, and Superman is every little boy's, and I say that very intensely, every little boy's, straight male boy's dream of being, even gay men too, who knows? But it's very much a male centric topic. And I've had many conversations with my colleagues at the time because I had very strong opinions about Superman, given my experience as a first generation immigrant and someone of mixed race who was the only person of their race from my hometown. I knew nobody else that was very specifically mixed French and Filipino. And if you talk to more mixed race people, I don't want to say that mix matters, but it does, because it, the kind of cultures and the kind of experiences that come with those that raise you. And I knew nobody like me. I was the only one of my kind in that kind of isolation and sadness, as well as growing up in religion. So understanding savior martyrdom, etc., all that, juicy Catholic Christian stuff. It was just very disheartening because I talk about it with my colleagues, and they would come to me with very interesting, I'll say that, very interesting perspectives of Superman from their own experience, which are all very real and very valid. But nobody understood mine. And what was worse was that I felt very invalidated, because when I would talk to a lot of my male colleagues, they'd be like, oh, well, of course, but this is what it really is. This is what it truly means. And so because I'm the kind of mind where like I like to learn, I like to prove things for myself. I was like, okay, well then let's do it. I was actually choosing between two comics at the time. I wanted to do my own Guyver, and then I wanted to do my own Superman. And I remember I was asking people for advice, and everyone's like, oh, do the Guyver one, do the Guyver one, do the Guyver one. There wasn't just an overwhelming response to Guyver. But then everyone was like, no, Superman's whatever. I don't think you could do that one. So, of course, that's the one that I chose. The one that people were like, I don't see you ever successfully making a Superman. So I was like, well, challenge accepted. Here we go. So in 10 days, yeah, like I was like, well, fine, I'll show you. I'll prove it to you that I can make a Superman. And so in about 10 days, I made the Superman. But yeah, I guess, would you like to know about the story or?
Yeah, we've seen the Lois and Superman story on TVs and movies and certainly in the comic books, but what is your take? How did you approach it?
When I sat down with Superman, I think the main question that I had, because in my mind, I'm a bit of a problem solver. When I look out into society, I see a bunch of knots and then I want to untie them. I want to break them apart. I want to understand them. And the biggest knot that I was faced with Superman, particularly in this cultural climate today, was why the hell would someone like him want to be a hero? That's my whole big thing with heroism. I grew up, as I mentioned, in religion. So it was really pushed upon me, this idea of like, be a hero, be a hero, be a hero, do the hard thing, give your life up, sacrifice yourself for the greater good for society. Things that we're now coming to understand to be just a very complex conversation. So much of it isn't just being a good person or doing what's quote unquote right. A lot of it is consumerism, it's scarcity, it's martyrdom, it's just all this historical trauma. Anyways, we'll get into that later. But I asked myself, why would a person like Clark Kent, and everyone would always say, oh, it's because he's a good Christian boy. I'm like, oh, so what does that mean? That means that he was raised to be a martyr. He was raised in the Christian faith. He was told that to be accepted and to go to heaven, etc., one must crucify themselves for the betterment of others. And in my mind, I didn't feel that was enough. Being disenfranchised from my faith and having gone through much of my 20s being that person, throwing myself under the bus, always being the one to take the hit, being the bigger person, I kind of realized how it never really worked out for me, because in the end, I was the one who died. I was the one who was under the bus while everyone else was thriving. I got myself into so many horrible situations, and where I was like, I know what the right thing is to do. The right thing is to put my head on the chopping block, take the hit, and be the hero, and I'll get the happy ending I want. And it was never happy. It was always just these awful situations, and where, like I said, I took the hit and then everyone else walked away free. And I just felt so cheated by that. And when I looked at Superman, I wondered, I was like, well, besides the fact that he's a man, so he has that privilege. He's a white passing man. So maybe if I also had that privilege, things would have worked out a little better for me. But besides that, I was like, why would someone like you want to do this? Why would you constantly be putting yourself in harm's way, constantly be fighting for a society that would otherwise want to see you dead and suffer? Particularly now with the way that we look at xenophobia and immigrants and racism and the intense transphobia and homophobia that North America is currently challenged with. I think of Superman, who is someone who represents all of those facets. He's kind of like the poster boy for that a little bit. Like, why? What on earth makes you want to save? Because in the old comics, he was just doing it because he's a good person. In my mind, that just wasn't enough. I'm like, no, that doesn't make any sense. I don't understand that. He's a sociopath. Like that couldn't, I don't get it. I really don't. Which is my privilege, I guess, as a woman. We'll get into that. But from my perspective, I wanted to make it more human. So I thought, oh, he's doing it for love. And from a more human perspective, he's trying to save the world because he just wants to get married and have a normal life and, live the dream. His dream is being like a stay-at-home dad and, marrying the woman of his dreams and just living that quaint little life. But he has to fight for it because he's a minority and he doesn't just get to have that naturally. He has all of this trauma. And I just started to inject, that's where my own experience came in. But yeah, and then the whole first issue of Superman became his thesis. Like, why am I a hero? Why do I choose to be a hero in a world that is actively taking advantage of me? And I know that. So why am I choosing to play along and do the hero thing. And it's because he just wants to ask Lois out on a date. He's desperate to ask his boss, Lois, out on a date. But he doesn't feel that he's good enough for her because in his eyes, he's like, oh, she has a million Pulitzers. She's so smart. She's beautiful. She's all these things. She's like a city girl. And I'm just some nerdy, like loser country boy who has all, he has also, you know, being a first generation immigrant and probably having grown up with his parents, beating it into him, like assimilate, assimilate, assimilate. He has all this internalized insecurity, which I find interesting because I'm like, great. And which was like, at the time, that's what I was suffering. I was like 27 and I had all of these issues with assimilation and insecurity and like, who am I and where do I belong, and fighting back against my Catholic trauma and my Christian trauma and my BIPOC trauma, etc. But then always dreaming of like finding the perfect husband and having a wonderful life and all the happy little things. Anyways, but yeah, and that became my first issue. And from there, the story just evolved as I started to unpack all the other questions that I brought up with Superman. Like, for example, I am a woman, so my experience is very different than a straight man's. And so the second issue, Supernormal Man, was unpacking savior martyrdom from the perspective of a culture in North America that teaches men that their only value is to give their life up for their country and to die in some sort of service. Which also brings back to the original reason why these superhero comics were created in the 1900s. I'm sure there's okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I know very basically that the original superhero comics were created as propaganda during the First and Second World War to just really inspire young men to join the army. And that, yeah, giving your life up for your country is cool. Giving your life up for your country is hip and it's awesome. And it makes you this hero character, dying for justice and for honor and to save your woman, you know, to save the woman you love and your kids. And they made it seem so fun and exciting, which now, fast forward to today, although not everyone, you know, we don't have just like open conscription. People aren't forced to do it anymore. That idea is still very prevalent, particularly to like young, vulnerable men. And even if, you know, you still have men who aren't pressured to go into the military, they have normal jobs. There's still, I see it in my husband all the time. He has this pressure where he needs to be the hero. He needs to save. He needs to be the one that needs to provide in some sort of physical way. He needs to be the one that shoulders the burden. And I saw this too, especially in my father, in my male guardians, in my godfather, in just a lot of the straight men in my life that I love and adore, and all of my colleagues too. You know, there was this rejection of emotion, rejection of themselves, which is also prevalent, you know, in the Catholic religion and Christian. You know, you're supposed to sacrifice yourself. At least that's what it preaches, which makes me so sad. To be a good person, to be worthy. That's like that thing, to be worthy of being good, to be worthy of praise. You have to die or be bloodied up or beaten up or all these horrible, violent things, which I would see and I internalized because I love macho media. I love superheroes as a kid. I loved spy dramas. I love martial arts dramas. I love all these very male-centric genres that were very machismo. And I'm smiling as I'm talking about this because I love them. They're just so juicy and fun and silly. And I love it. I love anything where people are throwing fists at each other instead of talking. It's so exciting. So when it came to the second issue now, Super Normal Man, I wanted to kind of look at what would be the ideal man today. And I wanted to unpack all of the pressure put on Superman to, well, just die, essentially. And in the issue, he's journaling, his little therapy journal, and he's ranting. First of all, in my version, Clark is the cartoonist at the Daily Planet. So I never got that about the original comics. I'm like, what does he even do at the Daily Planet? I knew he wrote articles, but it was just like, what is your job, really, Clark? But I thought it'd be so much more funny, and I thought it was such like an obvious move that he's the guy that does the political comic strips. Very meta. But he's writing in his journal because he wants to pitch a comic just about Superman being a normal guy who pays taxes, and how that is heroism within itself, that he's just a normal dude in society who has rent to pay and taxes and buys groceries and has his own insecurities and issues. And he tells this to one of his friends at work, one of his male friends, and they're kind of like, is this a cry for help, Clark? Are you good? Because this is like an embarrassing moment for you. I don't know how I feel. And he gets mad, and he's writing in his journal saying that is Superman's only value that he can die? Is he only worth attention when he's getting beat up and when he's giving his life up for someone else, when he's putting his culture and his nationality and everything about being Kryptonian on display like a costume and parading it around like entertainment for people to make them feel better about themselves? Like, is that my only purpose? Or he crosses that out, is that Superman's only purpose? And then it digs deep a little bit more into the ideal, because I kept asking, I'm like, what storm of trauma would create a person like Superman or like me? Like, what kind of trauma did I experience that made me want to be a savior, that made me so desperate to be a part of societies that hated me? Because that was a big problem for me when I was a kid, and even growing up, and even now, I keep finding myself in these situations where I yearn to be a part of groups and societies where I have nothing in common with these people. They have nothing in common with me. For all intents and purposes, we would never truly make good company or good friends. And yet I feel this sense of being left out and wishing that I could just fit in and that I could just belong and that I could just be a part of these spaces for whatever reason, my trauma, right? And so I thought about Clark and like, why are you fighting so hard to be accepted? Like, why? Why do you want to be here? And then so I thought of him in Kansas. And I also came from a small town. And when you come from a small town, you're in a space where people don't expect a lot of you. They don't want a lot of you. If anything, the assimilation is even more intense because, you can't jump too high, you can't be too low, you can't dress a certain way, you can't say certain things. Everyone knows everyone. So everyone's going to hear about it. If you step one hair out of line, incredibly judgmental, especially if it's a highly religious group. There are very definite, very intense expectations. And your life, in a sense, is just decided for you. So I thought of Clark as a kid. Maybe he had dreams. He read comics. He wanted to be a hero. He wanted to have a cool career. Maybe he watched movies. He wanted to be an actor or a writer or some fancy, air quotes, city job. Because that's what we would say back in the day, like, oh, you're a fancy, like, city person. Whereas, like, mostly everyone there would work at the steel plant, or they were a farmer, or they just had normal jobs in town. You were a nurse or a doctor or a lawyer. But again, it's a small pond. Your life is set out for you. So Clark, it was expected of him probably that he would just inherit the farm. He'd just become a farmer. He would just, marry Lana or whatever girl, and they'd settle down. She'd be a stay-at-home mom. They'd have kids, and then, continue the cycle. They go to church every Sunday. But Clark, what if he had dreams? What if his dream was to do something else? And the dream that I wanted to challenge as Supernormal Man is that his dream wasn't to be a hero. His dream was to just have, a nice job in the city. And it's funny, I do it all very comedically because he's saying, like, what's so good about giving your life up? Why is that the only thing that I'm good for when I'm holding down a stable job as an artist in the most expensive city in all of America? I have a 1-bedroom apartment. I'm paying my rent. I'm doing my taxes. Like, I'm a catch, man. Why can't anyone see, like, I'm a well-adjusted guy? I do my best to stay aware. I'm compassionate. I go to therapy. Why is it that the only value I have is these hopped up ideals of nationalism and patriotism? And so it's very silly until, Lois comes around and she explains that, the super thing about Superman isn't about what he wears or what he does or all the glitz and glam of the dream. It's just that deep down, he's a good person. And that's what makes him wonderful. It's truly not about any of the song and dance. It's just simply that he's a good person and he's trying his best. But yeah, then the series, it kept going on. I did one about Lois in Gotham with Dick and how she's his mentor big sister. And I unpacked a lot of my daddy issues in that one, between the dynamic of Robin and Batman and growing up, in an unstable household with a father you both idolized and were terrified of, who, for all intents and purposes, because of If we look at Batman and Robin, we know that the Batman is the way that he is. He abuses the Robins because of his trauma, because he is emotionally stunted, because he had so many horrible things happen to him as a child and just continued to pack on trauma after trauma. So, like complex PTSD. Now, as an adult man who has the responsibility of looking after all of his adopted kids, he really fails. He doesn't know how to give them love or affection. He's really falling prey to all these like really hyper masculine tropes of like not talking about your feelings and pushing back compassion and etc. And how his children are suffering from that, especially today. I really wanted to depict a Robin that was today's teenager, very Gen Z. So they're highly educated about gender, sexuality, emotion. And there's that fight between loving your parents so desperately and wanting nothing more than to make them proud and to be like them because you idolize them, but then also seeing their flaws and being hurt, like deeply and intensely hurt by not only like their suffering, but how that suffering affects you. And also my experiences as being like a mentor, because Lois is his mentor. And you find out about Lois and how she was also one of those messed up kids whose father was like a military man and who wasn't the best to her. And that's why she can relate to Dick. And then their beautiful relationship of healing one another through simply just like talking and giving one another affection. And then you have Superman show up where he's a true hero. And that's like I wanted to show like the metaphor of that whole one was that true heroism sometimes isn't punching bad guys or explosions and violence. It's just listening. You see Lois listening to Dick, and then Superman shows up, and then he's like, "Hey, Lois, I'm not stalking you at all. Just happen to be in the area. Here's some flowers. How you doing?" And then she asked, like, "Can you just listen to me for like a second? Because I'm having a moment." And he says, "Sure." And then he listens to her, and he's compassionate and kind and loving, and to show that that is true masculine heroism. Sometimes you don't need to do anything, which is again something else that I've noticed a lot with men in my life. Like their love language tends to be action or wanting to fix things. Sometimes it's not about fixing things. Sometimes it's about just sitting in the moment and listening and saying, "I hear you, I understand, you're not judged, and you are loved." And that is so powerful and such a powerful message, I think, coming from someone like Superman, just to show that more effeminate side, if I must say, like a more nurturing side that's very accepting. It's not about fixing, it's not about changing anything. It's just about accepting the moment and accepting that everything is real and valid. And by all means, this too will pass, but just sitting in it and showing that kindness, that's heroism. And yeah, like the series just goes on. I think I did 2 more issues after that, a Wonder Woman, as well as just a really silly romance comedy one between Lois and Clark. And then I did Origins, which really encapsulated how Lois became Lois and how Lois and Clark first met and how the entire Superman mythology came into existence, how she won the Pulitzer, how he started working at the Daily Planet, how she became the editor at the Daily Planet, like what happened to Perry. So yeah, and that was also very fun.
Do you have plans to collect your zines into one book for people to purchase?
Because they all have the 5 mini zines that are each 10 pages, they have a different format to the big ones. So no, I've just been selling them all kind of separately and then like in a big mega pack with a discount where you can get the entire series. So it's Origins, including the first 5 issues.
Probably should have asked this earlier, but with the popularity of the new James Gunn Superman movie, I wanted to ask you, have you seen it? Because some of the things that you actually talk about are referenced in the movie, believe it or not.
I haven't seen it and I don't plan to be totally honest. At least not in any way that's legal or anytime soon. So
Why don't you want to see the Superman movie?
So the reason that I've decided not to see it, first and foremost, so this is more of like the social aspect of it, I don't really believe in hero content anymore, particularly superhero content, because of everything I talked about, like the martyrdom, the glorification, the idolization of singular beings who all of the pressure on literally of the world, is put on to save the world. I find that type of content incredibly harmful for audiences. If anything, the real real change will never come from just one person wielding immense power and doing all the work. I've found if you do something for somebody, if you take away that power from them and you take that onto yourself, you're learning all the lessons, but they aren't. And that within itself is, I'm not cruel. Cruel isn't the right word, but it's like a highway robbery. You're cheating them out of growth and out of learning and out of the, responsibility that they have and the opportunity that they have to save themselves. So again, in my Superman, Clark's whole thesis is that he needs to save himself. The reason he's a hero is because he's not doing this for anybody else. This isn't about the world. This is about him and his very selfish want to date his boss. He saves the world because he's procrastinating. He's putting it off. He's like, tomorrow, ask her on a date. Tomorrow, tomorrow. As all these tomorrows come, there's a new problem. There's a new issue. There's a new something to get in the way. And he's kind of using it as an excuse to be like, oh, I know. I'll get rid of this. And then after that, then I'll ask her out. And so it turns into this hilarious comedy of him just becoming a savior. Again, not because he's trying to save people, but because he's just procrastinating because he wants to ask his boss out on a date. He wants the world to not blow up because, he has dreams that have nothing to do with the world. Well, I mean, to do with the world that he's in, like getting a good job, getting an apartment, getting married, having kids. And the only way he can do that is if he makes sure the world doesn't explode. So going back to the new films, it has all these ideas, and you can't just make one person do that. It has to be a communal effort. It needs to be a community and a group of people who are inspired maybe by one hero or one person's heroic actions to then become heroes within themselves and take affirmative action as a group and make change. This is something I talked about in Origins, because in it, Superman doesn't do a lot of fighting or saving. He saves Lois once. It becomes a global sensation. Some pretty nasty, relevant stuff with the US government occurs when they learn of his existence. And then everyone, at least in America, and then again, like it spreads worldwide, starts to realize like, hey, this is wrong. Maybe we should all step up and do what we can do. And Lois talks about that in her Pulitzer-winning article, where she coins the term Superman, not because she calls this one stranger, this heroic stranger Superman, but that it's a movement. And it's about, just like this stranger, everybody should rise up and everybody should make change. And so the reason, as I said, that I'm not seeing it for the first part is that because I'm very doubtful, even if the movie is talking about, my friend saw it and she gave me the dirt on the film. She was like, no, it's really cute and you definitely should see it. But, despite the fact that it's talking to you about like, oh, the immigrant story, he's a nicer, sweeter guy, all these wonderful things, at the end of the day, he's still martyring himself. And that's the part that I don't agree with. So there's that aspect of it, which I'm tired of giving my money to the same old story. There's only so many, like, sure, we're changing the costume, we're adding different aspects to it, but if the end is still the end, it just doesn't sit right with me. And then the second part of why I don't want to see the movie is that because I guess I've come to my end with Superman. I'm done with him. It's like when you internalize a hero story or internalize a very popular piece of mythology, it's with you. And so that all the new media and the new stories come out, you want to read it because it still has so much life for you and it's still so alive and it still captures your mind and your heart and it inspires you. But after getting to the root of my Superman and my connection to that kind of media and to savior martyrdom, and after really unpacking it and seeing it for what it is, and then allowing myself through the comicking process to grieve that piece of art and to grieve that life story and that part of myself, I'm over it. That sounds so terrible, but I'm just like, meh, like all superheroes. It was the weirdest. I never would have thought this because ever since I was a kid, I was like superheroes always. Like my pseudonym is Aquaman. I was the Batman before. I've done Superman. I've done Wonder Woman. And I was huge when I was a kid. I was writing like trashy DC fan fiction online. Superheroes were like everything. I had the statues, the comics. And then now, once I've kind of gotten to the bottom of why I like these things and what attracts me to them, I'm just like, oh, well then. So yeah, like you're not going to catch me in a theater watching superhero, at least like IP superhero content anytime soon. I've outgrown it, which is heartbreaking, but also yeah, it was one of the weird side effects of writing stories about these heroes and kind of getting my ish out.
Right. Well, I'd like to switch gears completely now and talk a little bit more about the tools used to create your art. I wonder if you could walk me through the process of how you do that.
I'm honestly like a caveman with my setup. So all of my work is done digitally, but I use my setup very, very basically. All of my community, they're artists, and the way that they use Photoshop or just, I'm not a tech person. The way that they use just any program that they use always astonishes me. And I have these moments of like, oh my God, this is the future. We live in the future because the way that I do it, it's just very simple. I do it digitally. I currently use Clip Studio. And yeah, I just open up a piece of paper. I draw in my roughs. I go from roughs into pencils, pencils into inks. And then I'm only just now kind of getting into tones and using some like simple like design gray washes instead of like shadows and stuff like that. But yeah, and that's it. It's just very simple. I write it, I draw it, I ink it, and then it's done.
And that's it.
That's it. So boring. As much as like I talk about all of like I can go on and talking about forever all of like the cool ins and outs of the philosophy and sociology and the history. And then when it comes to me making the comic, it's just very old fashioned. I have my piece of paper, my pencil, my ink, and it's
Yeah,
done.
there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if it works for you, that's the main thing. It is fascinating to me as a non-creator to talk to artists and writers and the thought process behind it. Like you typically come up with the story first and then you put pen to paper, or is it like a little bit of both along the way?
It was a little bit of both. I remember usually with the 10-page comics, it was usually very easy to just like poop out a 10-page short story and then follow the process. With Origin, for example, which was a much longer comic, but that I also made on a very tiny schedule. I think it's almost a 40 or 50-page comic, and I made it within a month. But yeah, I wrote the original script out, and I think at that time it was only just a little over 20 pages. As I sat down and began to draw it, I would get just like a blast of inspiration and see a hole in the story and be like, oh, I have to add 2 pages here and 2 pages there until the end result ended up being almost 40 pages of like a fully rounded story. But yeah, I think it really depends on the situation. It's very fluid. Every comic is different. Like, have you seen the Charles Dickens biopic movie
No, I
with the
haven't.
actor from Downton Abbey?
I'm sorry, I haven't seen that. No.
I think that film, in a very fun way, depicts, because in the film, he's writing a Christmas carol, but I think it depicts the exact same. I was seeing it, I felt so validated. I'm like, that's how I write things. That's how I come up with things. But as he was writing A Christmas Carol, he started with the bare basics of his life and what was really pissing him off or stressing him out at the time. And then as every single day, he'd just be out in life and get little glimpses. He'd see a person or hear a name or get himself into this wild situation, which he would then farm for his work, which is, I think, any artist could really relate to that because, like, art imitates life, life imitates art, etc. But yeah, it's a very organic process. I feel like a sponge. I take a bunch of things in and then I go through it and I decide what I want to put my energy into and what serves the current story or the current line of inspiration I'm following.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing that. So we've been talking a bit about your current work that you have available, but I'm wondering what is your next project that you could talk about?
That I can talk about. Oh dear. Well, currently just on my Instagram, I've been uploading these short comics called Love Light Medley. It's a mixture, it's a medley of, I guess, some of the similar to Superman, it's just stories in my life that I've always felt very drawn to. They're all very much the same hero's tale, same journey of growth, death, and rebirth, and putting them all together in one story. So there's 7 separate stories, starting with there's Dune, there's The Matrix, there's Sword in the Stone. Oh gosh, Lion King is in there. But they all end with, oh, Lord of the Rings is one of them. That's right. Harry Potter is in there. And then they all end with The Count of Monte Cristo and then a musical from Hercules. And they all come together. And I've just been uploading those for free on Instagram when I can. All I can say is that I have been developing a series with a children's YA publisher for the last 4 years that is still working its way. I feel like I'm close to the finish line, but I don't want to jinx myself in terms of, published work. But yeah, that's really all I got going on right now.
Well, that's quite a bit. So for people who want to find out more about what you're doing today and in the future, where should they go online to find out more about you?
The only online presence that I have, I'm actually incredibly offline, is just Instagram. I'm on Instagram at Aquamanni, Aquamanni. And it's really it. That's the only place.
Very good. Well, Emmanuelle, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering, is there something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview?
So another thing I wanted to explore with Clark and Lois was my gender fluidity. So when I wrote the comic, I kind of divided my personality into two. Clark was my masculine and Lois was my feminine. It was just very funny because in my mind and in my own experience, my masculine side is the romantic one. He's the nurturer. He's the side of me that is more calm, that provides, that is the one that's stable, and is just, the more sensitive side of me. And my feminine side is the go-getter, is the one that like takes no prisoners, is a hustler, that tooth and nail wants nothing more than to win and to get what she wants, and is the side that protects me and fights for me to live out in life. That was one of my fun ways to make the comic.
Thanks to Emmanuelle for the chat. You can discover more about Emmanuelle on Instagram at instagram.com/Aquamanni. That's Aquamanni. And thank you for tuning into the True North Country Comics podcast. I invite you to visit the True North Country Comics website to listen to even more conversations from creators on making comic books and graphic novels. I also encourage you to subscribe via the website so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can follow along True North Country Comics on most social media sites. And you're encouraged to send any and all feedback to John at truenorthcountrycomics.com. Thanks for tuning in, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2025.